Hi, everyone. Please allow me to welcome you to our second panel of the day, New Technologies in Stride. For this session, our panelists are Dr. Agapow, Director in the Statistics and Data Science Innovation Hub at GSK, Catherine Pollard, Director of Tech Policy at NHS England's Transformation Directorate, Dr. Luca Finelli, Head of Data, AI and Digital at Novartis, Dr. Rebecca Pope, UK's Digital and Data Science Innovation Lead at Roche and Senior Research Fellow in AI at UCL, and Markus Gershater, co-founder and CSO at Synthace. This session is going to be chaired by David Booth. David is the CEO of Diagnostics. I had the pleasure of sitting next to him last night over dinner and was just blown away with all the work that he has prepared for this upcoming wonderful session. Without further ado, New Technologies in Stride.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm excited to be here with you today. Thank you to the organizing team for helping to put together such an amazing panel and allowing me to moderate this panel. Quick background about me before we get started. As mentioned, my name is David Booth. I helped to start, currently I'm the CEO of Diagnostics, a company based in Missoula, Montana, that focuses on non-invasive liquid biopsy solutions. We focus primarily on extracellular vesicles. I was selected as a leader of tomorrow and participated in GAP Summit back in 2018 in Cambridge. So this is only my second time in Cambridge. Excited to be back. And I truly am grateful to be back here sitting on this side of the stage and moderating this panel. It means a lot to me. For this New Technologies in Stride session, we plan to spend about half of our time in an open discussion between the panelists. I have a couple of questions that we'll go through, talking about some of the opportunities, potentially some risks, potential downsides, as well of AI, ML, and/or automation in biotech and healthcare. We'll then shift into a conversation with the audience with the remaining time. It might be a little bit more of a fireside chat. So we encourage you to be thinking about your questions at the end. I'll keep my eye on the clock. About halfway through, we'll actually shift to questions. And those questions may turn into some additional conversation, and we'll have some back and forth there. So to kick off the session, I'd like to give each of the panelists an opportunity to share a bit more about who they are and what they do. Markus, I'll let you start here.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Real pleasure to be here. So I'm Markus. I'm a biochemist by original training. Spent a bit of time in and out of academia and industry before co-founding Synthace, where for the last 11 years now, it pains me to think, but a long time, we've been working out how to try and address biological complexity more effectively with digital tools and automation primarily. That's me.
Hi everyone, so I'm Rebecca. First of all, well done after the dinner for getting here today. If any of you did see Harry Potter, you had too much of the free red wine. But how awesome was it last night, right? But I left before coffees because I was on the panel. So my name's Rebecca. My background, I'm a complete work nomadic in a true Roche way. So I started, I'm a clinical neuroscientist by trade, my PhD. Did some postdocs. My family hoped that I would then actually get a job, so I did some more postdocs. They were terribly disappointed. I then worked for a non-government organisation, so a think tank, did a lot of thinking, not much doing, which really frustrated me. But I learned a lot about the NHS system and how it works, and you have other great experts on the panel to talk about that as well. Then fortuitously, this place called IBM were looking for these things called data scientists, and they didn't care where you were from, right, or your background. They trained you up. So I went and worked at IBM and eventually crafted a role as European lead of Watson Health. They're now selling it, has nothing to do with me. I then went to KPMG, a consulting firm, to grow out their AI practice in the public sector. And I now work for Roche as digital and data science innovation lead. By show of hands, because this is what I do for a job, not just put my hand up, who thinks the technology you have in your pockets or in your hand is in your local hospital? Who thinks it's there? Okay, so that's my job. Right? So failing, clearly, right? But that is what I'm trying to do with great other people on this panel and with all of you. So I'll hand over to Luca.
So, hi everyone. It's a real honor to be here representing Novartis at this great conference. I was mesmerized yesterday by the dinner at Trinity, and I should have left after coffee because I'm not sure how this will now impair my performance at the this panel. But now, jokes apart, so I'm leading data, digital, and AI at Novartis in the newly formed data, digital, and IT organization. But I've been at Novartis for 17 years. I'm a scientist by training. I'm a theoretical physicist. And I like to think of myself still this way, even if I am sort of more of a career in a company. And I'm a creative explorer in my mind. That's how I approach things. And at Novartis, I've been leading over the last few years several real programs that bring AI and data science into products, which are products, internal products, digital products, which are used by our associates to do their job better, to really leverage AI data to generate insights and support decision making. So hopefully today we'll be sharing some of the experiences we built over the years and through your questions.
Brilliant. So I'm Catherine. I am the Director of Technology Policy across the NHS England and the Department of Health, so definitely feel like I am the odd one out on the panel and in the room, but hopefully you guys will indulge me. I'm an economist academically. I think we're probably the only two in the room, and kind of a career problem solver. I was in consulting after I left university, but have spent 12 years in the NHS trying to make it better in various ways, largely quite operational ways, working locally and nationally. I did a stint as Director of Strategy at UCLH, and I actually did a stint in charge of the health and care system in this patch, so in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I now spend my time trying to work out how digital data technology can help make the NHS more sustainable. So I should say the NHS and social care. We have actually a really strong and vibrant social care work stream as well. A lot of that has involved like really basic things. So why do trusts not have, like why are they still working on paper? Why are there still fax machines? What is it that means that we're still very vulnerable to kind of really egregious cyber attacks and things like that? All the way through to the really cool stuff which we get to do, which is thinking about the future. And where is all of the amazing things that data scientists, biotech, pharma are trying to kind of discover, and how can we try and instill that back into the NHS and much more rapidly. There was an article written, I think about a decade ago, that said it took 17 years to get an innovation into the NHS. So myself and my colleagues are trying to really foreshorten that. And one of the big things that we have done and we've just started on is how can we harness the nation's health data with the public's trust and with the public's consent, but for innovation purposes. But maybe we can talk about that a bit more.
Thanks, Catherine. I am Paul Agapow, primordially an immunologist and biochemist, and then I fell into computers or was saved by it, depending upon your point of view. I was in many terrible academic positions for many years before I betrayed myself and went to Big Pharma. Several years with AstraZeneca, but I'm now with GlaxoSmithKline in something with the jaunty title of the Statistical and Data Science Innovation Hub, where we use dry things to study wet things, okay? Optimizing clinical trials, trying to predict budgets, trying to hone patient cohorts, and all those sort of very sexy and interesting things. And I will hand it back.
Perfect. Thank you for the introductions and sharing a little bit more about your backgrounds. We're going to kick things off with our first question. Catherine, I'll hand this to you to start. But how can we leverage new digital technologies to address unmet healthcare needs and support healthcare innovation?
Yeah, so like big question, and one that we've actually spent quite a lot of time thinking about it. And the way that we have conceived about it in the NHS in England, and I'm going to confine myself to kind of England, although happy to try and answer badly questions on other countries, is to think about things in the three buckets: digitize, connect, transform. So the first challenge that we have in order to really do anything in terms of healthcare innovation is to get off paper. And that is still, as I said, a challenge. So we have about 20% of our NHS trusts are what we call highly digitized. They are much more productive. If anyone has been to Addenbrooke's, they will see that their clinicians spend a lot of time inputting their data in something called Epic, which is their electronic software system. But if you actually went to Lincolnshire, so not too far from here, or indeed into Norfolk, you'll have a very, very different experience. And there is a multiplicity of software being used none of which speaks to each other, even within the trust. So we have a massive investment program over the next couple of years in basically how we address that. And that is, where I think there is still masses of scope for innovation, is how can we ensure that we're not just digitizing effectively inefficient paper processes? How are we using the data to drive clinical decision support? And to really, we've got a significant workforce challenge, and I think our workforce challenge here is as great, if not greater, like operationally, than our actual underlying healthcare challenge, which is we just have not enough staff. And so I think kind of there is a massive opportunity in thinking about how we can use technology really smartly, just to shave off those extra minutes and seconds, and or help a nurse to operate take greater clinical risk and so on. And so there's loads there. Then there is, how do we harness the data? How do we join it up? How do we make it available? That's the kind of connect piece. Some of that is really basic, like how can we make sure if an ambulance is called out, they have some basic clinical information about you, if you can give them their name and date of birth so that they know if you're allergic to things or if you have a history, all the way through to like creating the data sets that my colleagues on this panel will probably go crazy for, in terms of how do you take the kind of 50 to 5 million people that we've got and really dig into their all of that rich information that we collect daily. And then the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle is a transformation piece. And we are looking at both, as I said, transformation use cases that focus on staff and kind of the workforce challenges, but then really critically, how can we engage people to be much more active participants in their healthcare? Hopefully those of you who've got mobile phones might have downloaded the NHS app. We've got a stream of new features that will be coming through onto the NHS app that will start with really basic things like booking and appointments management, and records and getting access to your results. But how can we actually turn that into a tool that means that it can connect with your Apple Watch or with all of the amazing health apps that are being developed and that have really strong promise, so that effectively we can create a much more vibrant kind of self-management ecosystem. So there is huge, huge potential, lots and lots of challenges, but I'm sure we'll get onto those.
Perfect. Thank you, Catherine. I was hoping we could talk a little bit more about the underlying data that's going in, whether it's more on the pharmaceutical side of things or it's more in trying to automate processes and operations within human resources, or you're doing some sort of task and you're trying to apply data in any sort of manner, I guess, within biotech. The most important thing is to make sure you have good data. You have quality data. Garbage in, garbage out still applies, whether it's really fancy AI machine learning or it's more simple concept. So, Markus, I was actually hoping you could comment a little bit more on the underlying data that's going into some of these workflows. If you're opening up an app and you're trying to better process and understand the data, we have to make sure the data's quality.
What's fascinating here is, so I was just listening to Catherine, and so just to illustrate this for a second, so Catherine's sort of working on the kind of healthcare delivery side of things, and I work right at the other end, right? So if you look at the process for discovering, then deploying a therapeutic, the first stage is you have to try and work out some kind of a target which you might be able to hit within a human cell that might be able to have some kind of therapeutic effect. Then you've got target validation, and then you've got to try and find a drug that actually interacts with that target. And that's sort of early stage preclinical research. And then, fast forward, you then find a molecule and you put that into clinical trials. And then finally, if it gets all the way through clinical trials, then you'd get to delivery. So but what's really striking is actually a lot of the things that Catherine is saying are exactly the same. And one of those things is about where digital tools can be used in an operational way, but we're also trying to look at how they might be used in a transformational way. When you've got something that is, not just giving you a 10% improvement, but giving you 100% improvement, 10,000% improvement, then it goes from being an operational thing to being a transformational thing. And I think that's a really exciting thing for us to be looking at from the digital perspective. The other thing is data. And the bedrock, this is a panel about sort of AI and technology, digital technologies, and I feel a bit awkward because we don't do any AI at Synthace. We are there to enable the experiments that you need to truly address biological complexity, which will create the data sets, which in turn can be used for AI, right? So it's about building the foundations. And if you look at where, and I'd be really fascinated to hear what the rest of the panel have experienced in this, but you hear a lot of anecdotes about AI having done fantastic things, but only after a huge amount of data prep. And I think it would be a great ambition to build those foundations so that it's then the norm to have those fantastic data that can then be just used, opportunistically applying AI wherever we can.
So I'd like to pick up on that because I think just appending to the great comments today. So let's say we solve regulation, right? Tick. Hard, but let's say we solve it. Tick. Unlikely the next 20 minutes. To Catherine's point, let's say we solve interoperability. So as you move around the healthcare system, your data moves around the healthcare system. And let's say we digitize that system. To Catherine's point, there are just shy of 25% of acute secondary care hospitals using paper. So let's say we solve that, and it goes into an electronic health record. Who still thinks you can build machine learning systems on the back of that data? Do you think you've solved the problem? Okay, I'm taking lack of hand raising as a no. But is that, do you think it's solved or not? No, it's not solved at all, right? Because then you've also then got there needs to be a vendor incentive of the EMR or the EHR data to be curated in a way so that it is, to Markus's point, then machine learning ready. And that's the real challenge. And then the question is, well, who does that thing, right? To Catherine's point, we have wonderful data analysts, data scientists, data engineers in the NHS. However, they're busy firefighting. They are very, very busy just trying to do what the NHS and our care systems are there for us to do, which is to care for people that are walking through or not walking through their doors, or that 1 in 8 people are medically fit. I have an issue with medically fit, but medically fit to be discharged back into their homes or into what we call a community bed. There are none. We also have a workforce issue. Look at this room and how many people can code. That's probably completely disproportionate to the number of people we need and that can code generally in the NHS. So we have a whole kind of workforce issue here. So even when you get through those kind of massive hurdles, and I'm kind of speaking from experience, because we are working with hospitals and working with NHS England and others to go, right, even when we have the data, and when I say we, what I mean is us as Roche employees being on honorary contracts, not seeing sensitive data, but building open source code that we release to the NHS on GitHub, we still haven't solved the problem. Okay? So my question to you, because you are our leaders of tomorrow, not this kind of, stale, pale, frail type. How are you going to do that? What does that look like for you? Because that's the challenge you have. And you have it for today, but you have it for future generations. And anyone got any ideas? How would you solve that problem?
I've got a really interesting, just very brief question here on this. One of the biggest things that I found, so I've run a small company doing a lot of this stuff, AI machine learning on data sources. One of the biggest things we've struggled with, and many people I know struggle with, is that the big groups like NHS go straight to an IBM. And so I'd love, given you've been at IBM as well, how do you get small companies in there and not just people taking the obvious thing and going for IBM or McKinsey or some consultant?
It's a great question around procurement, right? So I'm going to rugby ball to Catherine in just a moment, I think, on that one, because we're mates. But I think that's not very different from, and I'm not advocating the use of this particular service, right? But faculty were a very small company. They started as very grassroots, academic. They've come up and they've proven value. So I think it's about getting on the dynamic purchasing schemes that are out there. That's difficult in and of itself and takes a job to do, good 6 months to get on, where also you have cash flows and revenues and people to pay. But But second of all, it's like actually, and I talk as somebody who was the director of AI at KPMG, we would partner with organisations like yourselves in order to go into a pitch saying, you know, we're KPMG, we're basically a load of accountants, right? We weren't, but, you know, from a reputational perspective, God, I hope no one tweet that, jeez. But, you know, so actually we have a part of consulting, or the McKinsey model is about finding really, really strong connections, like a hub and spoke model, out to different capabilities that we don't have in-house. And so my suggestion to your question would be, start approaching those companies, because you know them, but do they know you? Catherine, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rebecca's totally right. We're trying to get a lot more streamlined in terms of how we think about our procurement approaches in general. Like we use G-Cloud a lot, and we have a lot of kind of Spark frameworks to try and surface more kind of smaller innovators that can come in and form or participate in whatever the kind of bit of our value chain is. The one thing I am going to kind of say, though, just for kind of context, is one of the reasons why kind of procurement is, in theory, like quite prickly in kind of healthcare, is because of the cyber risk. And like this is very top of my mind at the moment because we've had like some very significant issues in the last couple of months, and so we do need to be making sure that we're working with suppliers that are really like when you've got access to really, really sensitive personal data, or in theory you're connected to something called the HSCN network, which is effectively like the super secure network for exchanging that healthcare data. Like that means that you can become like a target, and unfortunately our data is increasingly a very highly prized target. And so just look at things like Cyber Essentials Plus, like that sort of accreditation is going to become increasingly important to us. And then the other thing is, the public are much more engaged about who's got access to their healthcare data and for what purpose. And so again, we were going to be making sure that transparency about usage and how it's being processed is going to be passed on to all of our suppliers. And so we do appreciate that creates some barriers to entry, but they're there for kind of good reason, because we are like the custodians of this incredibly rich but incredibly personal set of information. So hopefully that explains a bit of some of our reasoning, at least.
Yeah, look, data is expensive. Software, AI, all of that's cheap. TensorFlow, you can download it for free. We've got millions of people who can hack something up on a system. It's the data that's the distinguishing thing. So in a sense, data being expensive and data being difficult to find, that's not a bug, that's a feature of the system. That's commerce. I agree with you, it's a problem, and we should try and overcome that, but it's not accidental that that's happened. You look at something like Flatiron, gold standard quality data. If you're doing looking to do historical arms, if you're looking to do real world evidence investigation, 22 million cancer patients, their EHRs, every line of that piece of data, every item has been hand checked by someone. And that is an immensely difficult task, an immensely long task to put that together, and they charge to reflect that. So how do we get around that? We would need a different system then.
Wow, that was a pass. Thank you. Wow. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I operate also in a much easier space. Like, if you want to go and run a different experiment for developing an assay for your early stage drug discovery, you don't have to go to a regulator to ask whether you can do that or not. You just, need the technology, you need the capability, and then you run it. I think, what I'm really excited about is that we're just starting to see the emergence of like a whole new field. And it's where you have what I call automation 2.0. Forgive me for that. I'll explain in a second what that is in a second. Digital tools, and then actual proper experimental design, because this is something which is often overlooked. And it's the convergence of those three things. So automation 2.0. Automation, you would typically think of like a car production line or something, right? So automation, you look it up on the web. If you Google it now, you'll probably see a definition which says replacing the work of a human. right? I tend to think of not a car production line, I tend to think of Iron Man. And that is partly because I'm a nerd, but also because if we can make the scientist Tony Stark, right?
Or the female scientists, or others that represent that, just to be very clear and open about that.
Tony could be written several different
Exactly,
ways.
but we cannot escape that. That's a data problem as well, right? We need to be really careful with our language.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. It's an issue. It's an issue.
Tony with an I Stark.
Yeah.
So then we can give them automation which can augment their capabilities and turn them superhuman, right? You know, Tony with an I is human. You know, it is the suit which makes her superpowered, right? So if we can enable automation in that same way within the lab, so it's not replacing what you do as a scientist, it's augmenting what you can do as a scientist, that then opens up experimentation which you otherwise could not do. Okay. I'm actually going to leave digital tools for a second because Automation 2.0 then meshes wonderfully with proper experimental design. Proper experimental design is very, very hard when your standard tools are a handheld pipette and a copy of Excel, which is actually, let's face it, all of our standard tools when we're in the lab, right? So if we can mesh it with Automation 2.0, then essentially you enable experiments that were previously impossible. I'm very proud to say I had AstraZeneca up on stage with me at a conference recently saying that we had enabled experiments previously impossible. And the interesting thing then is like, okay, we can now do experiments which like people couldn't do before. What exact experiment should we run? Because the first ones we've run have been pretty naive. You know, they've just essentially been like a hyperdimensional saturation of a space, right? They're not particularly elegant. You know, what could we be doing then with what correct ML should we be using to explore that incredibly complex biological space more effectively? It's just the very start of a new field, and I'm incredibly excited about it. I don't know whether I actually followed on from that pass at all, but I started talking about stuff I'm enthusiastic about.
I want to double click on some of the automation and cost topic here before we shift into more of a fireside chat Q&A structure here for the rest of this session. There's certainly high costs when it comes to data. And when I think automation, actually where my mind went is to a conversation we had recently, Luca, which was surrounding automation within operations, within these pharmaceutical companies, within these healthcare providers, but on the back end, things that you don't think about, the logistics, keeping the company running smoothly. It might not involve patients. And some of those things can be expensive. You're taking in a lot of data, you want to take in quality data, you want to take a lot of data, and then you want to leverage it in a way that allows you to make good decisions. So this might apply to companies you might be familiar with that have roughly 100,000 employees based out of Basel, and I'd love to maybe hear some of your thoughts there, and then we'll transition into Q&A.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's an area I like a lot. I'm spending lots of time doing this type of thing. So there is a huge potential inside a pharma company, but in fact inside any company, to use data science, AI, automation to change our processes, to make decision making more effective, to augment humans into their decision, not necessarily substitute them, but that save the time they spend on really daunting tasks each time to come to a decision, and have their skills to be used to take the decision instead of preparing for everything. Huge opportunities. We've been doing lots of work in global drug development. Global drug development does fundamentally two main things. One is to run clinical studies, and pharma companies run clinical studies with hospitals and medical centers outside there, so it's a huge operation. Like a company like Novartis has about 500 to 700 clinical trials running simultaneously at any moment in time. Like, so it's 60, 70 countries, hundreds, thousands of medical centers, and so on. And running all of these operations, it's a huge machine, and there is a lot of uncertainty which is hidden into this process. And the major one is, will we find patients? Like, and you work with all of these hundreds of medical centers, everyone promises when you're planning stage, yeah, I can find 10 patients and with this disease for this therapy, I can find 10 here, 5 there. When it comes to reality, however, often these numbers get into half. So if you leave yourself at this uncertainty, your plans can get really screwed. And the scale we're operating, this has a tremendous negative impact. So AI or data science there have a huge potential to make predictions about what's the likelihood of actually really finding patients in a certain geography area, in a certain disease area, such that our operational plans will be on track and we will not hit this huge risk. Right? So that's one example. Another area is the transformation of a molecule in a medicine. Like discovery brings you a molecule, but you need to give a medicine to patient, which means having a proper formulation around it, a mode of administration, and also, so development does this work as well. And also there's lots of experimental work needs to happen. It takes years, like you need to test formulation for stability, for shelf life, and all of that. Can we use AI to improve this work, to make a lot of this experimentation in silico, thanks to the years and years of similar experiments we've been doing in the past, like however, somehow the data for that lies in graveyards of data. Can we take this out and use AI data science to make predictions about my new molecule and new formulation? And yes, we can. And we've been building approaches to do this. Manufacturing supply chain is another amazing area where you can apply scale these technologies, even better than in the clinical space, because you're actually dealing with machines and engineering, right? So you can measure everything you want. You can store huge amounts of data. You can go on a plant site and use edge computing and store data locally, compute locally, and make predictions which serve into the production directly. So huge potential. But there is a but. Like, this is a gap summit, so let's talk about the gaps that we have. I think we touched on funding. Like, all of these things internally needs to find funds, needs to be having a business case. You need to go in front of a board or some committee and show your idea, your project, and get funded. And typically they want to see revenue, not revenue in the sense of sales, but return on investment, concrete savings. And some years ago, when we started this, those committees were happy to hear about, I'm going to save X amount of time out of employees. I'm going to save, 20% of a certain stock and can be utilized or not produced and so on. Nowadays, they became a bit more, how should I say, real. They want to see dollars. They want to see real, or it's increasing. They want to see real dollars amounts that they can actually book into the P&Ls of the various business units. If there is a benefit, they want to cash it. And that's a challenge for innovation, because often the horizons for this type of return on investment are very short, like typically yearly budgets, yearly cycles. So if you start a new digitalization project, normally, we heard it, like big companies have bureaucracy and there is lots of approvals you need to get. So maybe it takes a year to deliver something. And it's very hard, like within this year, to actually show some impact on whatever P&L. Maybe you get a chance to get to show impact the next year, but still, a lot of these innovations are charting lots of new ground. There is, when it's patient for adoption of the new technology by the user, you're replacing the way of working of people. Like, that's not something, people say, yeah, I like it, but when it comes to their desk, they have thousands of reasons why they should not adopt it, because it puts them in a position of lack of comfort. So the gap and the risk is that there is sometimes not enough patience for getting these innovations delivered, right? And everyone that's working on it knows that this thing is going to hit, but the organization needs to be brought along to believe this and allow you to pass this so-called valley of death in the funding of the project, such that eventually you can scale.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting, and something that makes me a little bit nervous is if you have humans behind some of these projects and you're trying to develop them with keeping quarterly and annual goals in mind, if the incentives are misaligned in a way to where someone's maybe hyping up a certain project or maybe talking about results they quite haven't hit yet because they're worried about a team or a department maybe not being able to move forward in a certain way because you're kind of within the boundaries or you're within, put into the box of you have to have certain results within this date. I wouldn't want to see, or I hope that those incentives aren't placed in a way that people would not be able to move forward the work in the way that they want.
They're completely messed up. Like the incentives are completely to do with the timeframes. Like the number of digital innovation projects that must have failed in companies all around the world because you start with a huge amount of enthusiasm and everyone's like, yeah, AI is going to solve everything, and then basically it is hard, right? One of my favorite analogies is it's when you have the famous unknown unknowns in front of you, right? They just leap out at you from behind a bush, right? And you don't know how long that's going to take to solve, and so doing hard things is hard, and it takes an unpredictable amount of time. There's a law called Hofstadter's law. It's used mainly in coding, and it's like the amount of time that you need for a project is going to take longer than you think, even when you take into account Hofstadter's law, right? So it means that it is very, very difficult to predict how long these things are going to roll out, and so they just die, right? They get to a certain point. They said you said you were going to deliver this when you were all enthusiastic at the start. You were going to deliver all this, and it hasn't delivered by now, so it's done. And then another enthusiastic person will come along and say, "Hey, I've got a great new idea." It's sad. I mean, but then I also see that as an opportunity. If you can develop a technology which can optimize for that as well, like say, "Hey, yes, we can affect your P&L," we can. Then it means that actually these maybe are the digital innovations that can actually get out there and be used for the immediate gain, but also have that longer term lasting effect anyway. That's the hope.
Yeah, I think you made a very good point there. There's these big initiatives that promise to solve everything, and I usually think the bigger initiative is, the more likely it is to fail and result in nothing. And it's these small evolutionary changes have a better chance of actually surviving, making a difference in the business, because the pharma business is bizarre. The pharma business is one where your usual mode is that of failure. Drugs fail, clinical trials fail. You have many, many more examples of failure than you do of success. And the famous valley of death. 10,000 drug candidates lead towards one viable drug in the market there. So in this vast machinery of pharma, if you can just tilt the odds slightly in your favor, if you can make the probability of success at this stage, it's not 1%, if you can make it 2%. If you can just kind of lean on the seesaw, if you will, that is a great, huge benefit. Okay, that could make a real impact.
But there's also, sorry.
I was going to say, can I add, because I think it's interesting listening to this, because in my head, pharma should be, much more strategic. It's not driven by the same political winds of the
Did I laugh that out loud?
But one of the things, when I first started my job, so kind of 2 and a bit years ago, I used to get pitched to endlessly by people who were promise to kind of solve everything, to your point, right? And the reality is, yes, maybe, but you're never going to be able to evidence it. So let's go back to really practical things, really practical problems. And so, if anyone out there is trying to kind of develop a concept that they think the NHS might be a customer for, actually really do your due diligence around what our pinch points are. So which groups of our professionals are we incredibly short of? Radiologists, top tip. And GPs, another top tip. How can you give them 5 minutes back, 10 minutes back, on a kind of in a measurable way, and because that is actually incredibly valuable for us. And then the other thing that, to your point around the kind of early, the time frame issue. I mean, because we're obviously driven by a lot of the same kind of constraints around kind of in-year budgeting. But most finance directors in the NHS are willing to make kind of investor save pieces, but they don't want something that's kind of incredibly over-optimistic. So my other kind of top tip is, if you're ever kind of pitching to the NHS, is really focus on your downside scenarios, your most cautious kind of assumptions, because then they might actually believe them. Kind of the same thing around kind of there's just an massive optimism bias. So let's like bring things down to kind of worst case scenarios. And actually, because on some of our pinch points, they are that marginal gain is still so valuable. We'll go for it. So I think that level of realism, I think, is certainly one that it feels like both sides would need to kind of adopt.
I agree completely. I think there's this perverse incentive. There's this huge attractor towards the big wins, towards the hype, towards the, is it the Gartner curve of AI hype, where it's going to solve everything? And, in reality, what we find is that a lot of people are working on problems that are kind of very flashy, very, your typical Google headline in there. But when it comes to actual impact in our kind of healthcare drug development, very minor impact.
But let's not forget, it is our job to be entrepreneurial in our big businesses, right? So it is our job, and I say this as someone who's worked in consulting, has worked across the piece, to have a vision, but also show small value gains. Yeah? So it is, and we shouldn't shy away from it. It is my every day to say to, I'm in a culture where I am empowered, but that means I'm accountable, right? So I'm given a budget of X million, fine, but my head's on the line, right? If that doesn't deliver. So we've got partnerships, one of which you know about. I have to take people on a journey. That's my job. My job is to go, do you know what, this is hard. Yeah, we don't know actually if we're ever going to be able to have a system that plugs into the electronic health record at Great Ormond Street Hospital and brings genetic information from genomic laboratory hubs in a consumable way to a doctor's phone at the point of care. But you know what? You've given me the accountability to take that risk. And so don't shy away from that. We can sit here and go, oh yeah, it's hard and lots of things fail and everybody dies, valley of death, right? But it's also, don't shy away from the fact that's your job. So take people on a journey, but also to Catherine's point, be honest. I'm honest with the people, our internal stakeholders at Roche. I'm like, right, you've given me this job. It's nobody else's job. It's my job to make this work. But I'm going to take you on the my organisation traditionally, we've got a lot of people that have only ever known how to launch a drug or a diagnostic. That is entirely different from launching a digital product into the NHS. Okay, so launching a drug looks like this. It's a straight line. Launching a digital product looks like that, and then eventually you get a little line, right? And then you say, here you go, system. It's now yours. Okay, so please do not shy away from the fact that as interesting and as good as the job title sounds, your job is to take people on that journey, particularly in pharma, right? Because that is new to them. In biotech, that we don't launch digital products. How many do Roche have in the market? Exactly, right? Okay, we've got one or two, but we're not launching many. Because actually we need an appetite of risk. We need a different appetite of innovation, and we cannot shy away from that. It is different from our traditional business model. So my suggestion is to find a culture where you're able to stretch people's imagination, but you are also accountable for delivery. Because, we're not in research, and I wear multiple hats, not in a look at me way, I've got 70 hats. Didn't I do well? Thanks, Mum. But it's more like, you see it in research where it's like, here's a grant, tell me what you did in 5 years' time. That doesn't fly in business, and it doesn't fly in pharma, it doesn't fly in consulting, it doesn't fly when you're saying to the NHS, you know what, you've got this big Palantir system, how about we pitch to you, right? So just don't forget that there is a business angle to whatever you are doing, however much you go, but I'm a scientist, and I do hard things. Okay, it doesn't fly. If you want to do that, have a solely academic career, and even then, your business is selling to your funders and to your grant holders. You cannot escape it. Oh, I feel like I've had a really good therapy session.
Oh, so
Thanks for that. Thanks, folks.
Rebecca, thank you so much, and thank you to all the panelists. I'd love to take an opportunity to invite some of the audience members into the conversation, so please raise your hand. We'll go from left side of the room to the right side of the room the best we can. And let's start on the blue shirt up near the top here.
Thank you very much. I'm Miles, and I'm a computational chemist at AstraZeneca. And you spoke about the need to have curated, useful data that we can actually use for data science, and this is something that's really quite difficult to do at the moment. Then Luca, you spoke a little bit about how in, for example, a chemical reactor, we can get a machine to take loads of measurements really easily, which can then be really easily curated into data that we can use. Does there need to be a change in the way that people input data, whether it be a doctor inputting into a medical record or a scientist inputting into a lab notebook? And how can we change and innovate in that area in the industry to make this more effective?
Me.
Poor Luca.
Yes. Sorry. Oh, too enthusiastic. Luca, go.
You said you're a nerd, but I'm not sure.
I'm an enthusiastic extroverted nerd. Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. ELNs, yes. ELNs need to die. Electronic lab notebooks, sorry. So this is basically where you have, instead of paper notebook, you have a computer, and the scientist has to go through their entire process of experiment, and then they have to forensically document all of this into their ELN, hopefully making data structures that are then useful for ML. It'll never work. It's never worked up to this point, and it'll never work in future. I hope there's no ELN manufacturers here. We need the whole process to be in the digital world. You design your experiment in the digital world, you plan it, you run it, you analyze it, all in the digital world, and then you're just commenting it, right? It's like commenting on code or whatever. You're just adding annotations of your interpretation of that beautifully structured digital information that's come from the experiment. I'm sorry, Luca, your turn.
I'm probably just adding something to the same theme. I think in general, if you generalize this, I think all of this transformation with digital and AI have come to places which were not such. So we had to utilize data that was not collected for AI and clean it, transform it. The ambition is to become digital native. The ambition is to have labs where everything has been designed up front that will fly into some AI algorithm, that everything is can exchange information completely without any manual tweaking. I think that's where companies like ours are trying to go, but it's just a very lengthy process because you need to rehaul a huge amount of systems and processes and practices in order to get to that point. But that's really the secret, I think, to eventually become AI-powered, because what we're doing today, it's actually running one-off projects and one-off projects and one-off projects, and they always have this huge amount of overhead costs just to make things ready for the transformation to come in. So I think this is where everything new should be designed this way.
Fantastic.
Can I just add, and this is definitely kind of more on the horizon with the view of inspiring people. So we have the same problem in kind of healthcare delivery, in the sense that there's this conundrum between kind of consultation, physician with patient. Really what you want to do is to have a meaningful conversation, lots of eye contact, a really caring and person-centered interaction. But you also need the physician to record as much information as they possibly can. And so one of the things that they've started to do, actually I've seen it more in the States than here, but hopefully it will come, is voice, and having kind of voice recording and trying to get so basically to stop thinking that the data that we collect has to be the stuff that's inputted in a software system. So what can we do with voice and what can we do with video recording, and how over time can actually the use of different AI applications start to generate insight from that. And we're starting to get quite good at that with, lots of doctors transcribe their letters that way. They'll just talk, and we've got quite good with kind of dictation. But I think that in terms of looking at the next kind of generation of things, I think we all need to think kind of a little bit more, I guess, out of the box in terms of where's that data come from. So we can make it as much part of the naturalistic behavior of whoever the person is. We need to capture the data as possible.
Thank you, Catherine. Love to open it up to another question. We'll stick to this side of the room for the next question here. Perfect. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind.
Thank you. My name is Alberto, and I'm a PhD student here in Cambridge. So my question is very broad. It goes beyond biotech. And you were speaking about AI and technology and automation, and also about how transformation can increase productivity. You said up to 10,000%. And you also spoke about the working culture. And I was thinking, so the working culture of working 40 hours a week started around 100 years ago in many countries. And if technology is meant to be, it's meant to work to make work much easier, and we never seem to have as a goal working less. So do you think that we will ever have that goal of working less? And is it going to be feasible? And when is it going to happen?
Markus.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to take this one. Surprise, surprise. I've got opinions about pretty much everything. I don't think, I reject the premise of your question, right? So I don't think it should be a goal to work less. You know, what we just heard from David Willits is about essentially all of the struggles we have in front of us that we need to try and solve. I passionately believe that biology can solve some of the world's biggest problems, right? But that's not going to happen by us seeing if we can shave hours off the working week. So, I mean, it would be ideal if we could just work 40 hours a week, frankly. And it would be wonderful if we can do that dramatically more effectively. Biology is never going to run out of problems for us to solve. This is not a zero-sum game where there's a certain amount of biological innovation that we need, and if only we can do it more efficiently, we can all go to the pub earlier on Friday. I think we need to use every single tool at our disposal, and I think we need to work our butts off to try and fix the planet and try and fix healthcare, and that's not going to lead to a particularly easy life. But I think we've got some major crises in front of us that we have to try and do something about. So I think it's probably working more and with the tools, and that's probably not what you wanted to hear.
Oh, I don't think it's working more. Markus, I think it's working smarter and diversifying the day.
And working more.
I don't think we need to work more. No, and I think we need to be really... There is a bigger sustainability piece here around what we do as workers in society, and because actually, we have a life. We have people, no, but we do, and it's really serious that you hear this, right? I'm not sure what the clap's for, but if it's you have a life or you don't have a life, I'm not sure, but you should have a life. You should think about actually being a citizen in society, and it's not all about work. It's about working smartly, working with diversification, because otherwise we are going to go back, and we are going back in multiple ways to having biased ways of people working and having less diversity in our workforce, right? Because actually, asymmetrically, who looks after the children? Who looks after loved ones? It's actually women or people that identify as women. So let's not forget that going to work it's not necessarily about the number of hours, right? I love going to work, right? I think it's brilliant. My wife's like, "Are you ever going to come out?" I'm like, "No, not really." I kind of avoid humans at all costs, but so I will be escaping after this meeting. But the point being, joking aside, is not about working more. It's about working smartly and having our Tony with an I or a Tony with a Y or our non-gendered Tony having tools to augment our ability to execute things. That's what's important, not the number of hours we work.
Yeah, sorry, I agree.
Cool. Should we go for a drink?
That's a really, really good point. And I wasn't I just get scared by the scale of the problems in front of us, and so think, okay, what's everything we can throw at it? It was not a nuanced viewpoint. Rebecca, you are absolutely correct, and I withdraw at least part of what I said.
We'll take another question from this side of the room, in the black.
Hi, I'm Emil from University of Copenhagen. So I work at the Bioinnovation Institute, which is a startup incubator. And already now we are seeing a lot of startup taking over the data management that the government maybe should do, and starting earning money on that, which I see is a evident problem, and I would like to maybe get your thoughts on, do you think that the healthcare system is equipped right now or will be equipped in the future to handle the larger amount of data being gathered, and in what way do you see the private sector and the public sector play together in solving this huge amount of data management? Yeah.
I guess that one's for me.
And it looks like we only have a couple minutes left, so we'll do a couple quick responses,
Yeah.
and then I'll have some closing remarks.
So the one-word answer is it's got to be partnership, right? The private sector can bring immense skills that we can never hope to generate in the public sector. We just need to make sure that that partnership sits within some guide rails, particularly, as I said, I'll keep going around we will lose the public's trust in how we handle their health data at our peril, and that is something that private and public should be caring as deeply about equally, because it will be, choose an economist garden. It is a negative externality every time we have a kind of an issue, which means that there is a downtick in public trust in terms of their healthcare data, and so everyone needs to care about that. But I think it's got to be in partnership, and I hope it's actually an increasingly flourishing and diverse partnerships, including big and small. I'll try to keep that one brief.
What Catherine said.
Perfect.
Last one.
So we only have about 2 minutes left here. So
There's a chap at the back there that I really feel for, that really wants to ask us something. And he's been really good. I mean, by this point, I'll be throwing my notepad. But yeah, well done you.
Yeah, hello, my name is Bolu. I'm Nigerian. Background is in medicine, and I just completed a master's at Imperial College in International Health Management. So I have 2 questions, and they're a bit controversial. The first question is really about data. We've been talking so much about data and the use of data in artificial intelligence. But my question is, what do you think? I think I would like to just hear the opinions of people on the panel. But what's your opinion on the future of data privacy and data ownership, and how much data should people own in the future? A lot of these tools now are trying to gather data from so many numerous sources, and I feel like there's a tilt towards people trying to get towards data ownership. So I just would like to hear your thoughts on data ownership from a private perspective and then from the public perspective. My second question is about I think we've really talked about how there are so many different solutions that are currently being driven, and so I'm really curious about how right now on my phone, I think I'll just use myself as an example. On my phone, I have a few different apps that do totally different things in healthcare. So someone is monitoring my, risk of this. Another one is monitoring my risk of hypertension. So my question is we've gotten to a point where there are so many problems and so many solutions, and what is the current theme towards collaborating and ensuring that we have a much more streamlined way of delivering healthcare compared to just having multiple apps that people lose the interest in.
I'll take the first one, 20 seconds. My opinion. I think the personal data should be actually owned by people, but we need still a technology that allows to trade this data, to exchange it, maybe in return of something, in return of some incentive that is good for the sharing that you're doing there. But to me, it's the only sustainable way for allowing these huge amounts of individual data to get into this technology and deliver some value.
Perfect. Thank you, Luca. And unfortunately, we're out of time for this session, but to me, I feel like the conversation just started. I've spoken with all the panelists beforehand, and they really do want to hear from you. After this session, most of the panelists will be around for a couple of hours. Please walk up to them, introduce yourselves. Go on Wova. LinkedIn, and all their social media is on there. Within this session, within about 15 minutes, there'll also be a handout that'll have more information about the panelists, free courses for AI/ML. A lot of our panelists have published, and a lot of their papers are going to be there as well. So please, 15 minutes, go on, download the handout. You'll see all their social media. Follow them, come up to them, continue the conversation. Thank you again, all the GBR organizers, for inviting us.